broadcast network, AFTERBUZZ TV. Over 20 million weekly downloads in over 150 countries, and your #1 source for after-show entertainment. AFTERBUZZ TV, the destination for TV superfans. Producing after-shows for over 300 of your favorite TV shows. Interviewing celebrities and showrunners. And bringing you behind-the-scenes exclusives. All thanks to E! Entertainment's Maria Menounos, producer Kevin Undergaro, and internet leader Akamai. Now, let the buzz begin!
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another after show here on AFTERBUZZ TV for Revenge on ABC. Of course, we're talking about Bait, the newest episode after a long hiatus. So much so that, you know what, my other co-host could actually still be on vacation. I am solo here tonight. I am Phil Svitek, Roxy Stryer, Anna Koppel, and of course, Christina Kaplan will be back when their schedules permit. But you get me today, and so hopefully you guys participate by commenting, whether on iTunes, youtube.com/AfterBuzzTV, SoundCloud, wherever you kind of get us, all for free $99. So without further ado, much to discuss in this episode. Let's start with David and Natalia, because obviously David is a single man, and here by happenstance, always through happenstance here in the Hamptons, Natalia is going over her will, so to speak, right? Everything that she's going to be owed right after. This is after her conversation with Victoria, and here she meets David Clark, and you know they're at the bar. They're talking about the Russian dolls and things like that. And I found it very interesting of how this is going to progress, because, you know, there's a lot of flirting there. And then when it gets to the boat, you know, she goes on his boat, and, you know, they kind of let all cards hang in the sense of, are you still dating Victoria? No, that's we've moved on. And what I like most about it is that now, coming back from the hiatus, a lot of what I'll be talking about is the various alliances and the switches of these alliances that is happening, right? With this, whereas in weeks past, we've had Victoria on the side of David and perhaps battling against Emily every now and then, but even so, Victoria ultimately ended up being on Emily's side, and here we are in a situation where that's reshuffled. Now Victoria is aligning herself with Lyman, which we'll talk about in a moment, which obviously goes against Luis because, you know, Luis is on the side of Nolan and Morse and, you know, now Emily as we're starting to develop. And so I'm curious to see how this is going to work out. Do I want the David Clark and Natalia relationship? You know, not necessarily to begin with, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It's really more interesting to see how it's going to develop in the sense of the political stance that David Clark's going to take on all of this, and whether or not he will stand against Victoria in this will trial, if for lack of a better term. So we'll see how that develops. Now, speaking of Natalia and Victoria, this is amazing. Victoria at her best, so to speak. You know, she's really not had too much to do in terms of her own agenda. You know, she's been sort of powerless, and she's accepted that post Daniel's death. She's obviously weakened, but now she's honoring his memory, wants to build this foundation, obviously wants to build this room and everything else for Margot, and she applauds Margot for quote unquote, you know, taking the higher road and not necessarily seeking revenge, which obviously is not the case, and we'll certainly talk about that. But here she is, and, you know, she didn't know who Natalie was. Natalie obviously sort of knew her, and, you know, I don't know. It's one of those things that we prejudge a lot of these characters, and oftentimes in the worst of ways. How many times do we sort of judge Louise as to what her actual motives are, what type of person she was. And that was even after 4 or 5 episodes. And with Natalie, this is our 2nd episode, and Victoria's shown her true colors, and of course we know Victoria's true colors. We've been with her for 4 seasons at this point. But Natalia, whether or not, there's a couple things that we learn. We learned that she married Edward Grayson, who was Victoria's father-in-law. We learned that she was his caretaker before that so she knew him for a total of 6 months before he passed away, married for about 4. At the time that she started working with him, she was married, then she got a divorce, and she had been released from a hospital due to taking money, so to speak. And so right now that doesn't bode well for Natalie. However, she did have that line that said, Victoria, I wanted to kind of make peace before all this broke, and I was willing to kind of work with you to get you some inheritance or whatever else. And obviously Victoria keeps rubbing Natalie the wrong way, and so she says, I'm going to protect this money. Personally, as much as I love Victoria, I never see Victoria, despite all of these new actions, as good. I think, even though she says she's moved on from, quote-unquote, the revenge of Emily and wants Margot to do the same thing, obviously there has to be a self-interest and preservation there, and I think it's just too ingrained in her nature at this point to be the way that she is. And I actually side with Natalie. I could be wrong. I may eat my words in an episode or 2, but I really do think that at this point in time, that Natalia is sort of saying the truth, and her kind of, as Victoria calls it, emotions and outburst in front of everybody, which of course I knew right from the get-go, and I imagine you guys did as well, was a total play by Victoria. I did believe Natalia in that moment that she was saying the truth. Now, obviously, it's one of those things that is very far-fetched. How do you fall in love with somebody after a couple of weeks? How do you round it up to love in a matter of 4 months and well spent? And how do you just not say, okay, she's just in it for the money? So it's a difficult case to argue on her side, which of course Lyman, being both a politician and of course and a lawyer, is taking full advantage of, and so is Victoria, thanks to his legal counsel. So, I think that it was really quite interesting to see. Victoria says to Lyman, "Prove your worth to me." And right away he does. But I also like how Victoria showed Lyman that ultimately she's in control. And so I like that, because despite all of this, Victoria's been, as much power as she's had, she's always sort of had to take a seat against someone. When it was Conrad, she was obviously taking a seat there. And so this time with Lyman, she says, I'm your client, so you're going to serve me, is what the subtext is. And so I enjoyed that a lot, because she was able to, show him that emotions are very easily played on other people as she played him in the short-lived moment. So, obviously a lot of money at stake. In theory, it's supposed to be going towards the Daniel Grayson Foundation and whatever else, and so obviously a very good cause. We'd all like to see that, but how it's going to work out, we'll see. All right. So, speaking of Lyman, we have his sister, Louise. And, while the main focus, as Lyman says, he's working with Victoria for 20%, and 20% of nothing, of course, is nothing. And so in this right, it will help fund his campaign, because he's cut off from the money. Now, how he plans to perhaps get his own inheritance back or whatever else, that will remain to be seen. I think he'll make a play for it. I think Lyman, as he states himself, is an opportunist. And so, he could end up in good graces with Luis. But Luis, for right now, she's understanding her life, and she's trying to elevate certain aspects of it. She's trying to repay Nolan by, going with him to Italy. But of course, Nolan can't. And, the nice part was I think she's trying to do all these things, but now she's going to start to understand what it means to actually help Nolan. So, while she may think that going to Italy and rewarding him with a vacation might be nice, as she sort of realizes tonight, the way to help him is in different ways, and that it can be fun and exciting doing it with them. Now, what she also doesn't know the darker side of it, how a lot of people's lives can be in danger, both actual lives, but also from a perspective of going to jail, and especially when you have someone like Lyman, who's a politician, he's very much apt to take advantage of this, so that way he can get at this inheritance pretty quickly, and so she just has to be careful there, and I think Nolan has to be careful for her, because Luis may not necessarily always think in that respect. But I liked how they grew closer together. They had that bond of, I thought we were the Wonder Twins, and we are almost like superheroes. And Luis gets to partake in this and use her mental illness, so to speak, to her advantage, or at least forgetfulness, and the fact that with everything that's happened between Margot and Luis, that was the perfect setup, because it made Margot so upset. Their history of quote unquote Margot almost dying because of Luis. It's come back in interesting ways. So it's fun to see that. And we'll see how this continues to develop overall for them. There was that one moment where I thought Luis would kind of go in for the kiss, as she says, I wouldn't have married you if I didn't like you. And she was nice. I'm going to say nice enough to say, here's divorce papers. And by kind of handing out the divorce papers, Nolan didn't take it. He said, I'm still going to help you and everything else. So I like that moment. We'll see. I really do think that they can actually develop and be something more than just friends in that particular situation. So speaking of Margot, I'm going to call, as I've said, this is the second half of the season might as well just be called Margot's Revenge, because this is where it's absolutely headed. Everything's sort of riding on this videotape. Simone, rather, I apologize, Simone, who apparently knows Nolan, so if I'm incorrect about it, let me know in the comments, fans. You guys are so great about that. But to my knowledge, I've never seen Simone, certainly not have an interaction with Nolan, to the fact that Nolan and her would be friends, where Simone would offer up this intel, which we find out later on that she is actually playing Nolan, because she's one of Margot's quote-unquote pets. And so, how that is fully going to continue, I don't know. But, in typical Revenge fashion, it had at least me fooled, in the sense that Margot was going to punish Simone, and that perhaps she didn't know about it, until that look and whatever else. So always interesting, these agents and double agents, so to speak. So Margot's got all these files on her servers that can't get hacked, because they're not online. They're just connected to each other in this one room. She has alerts of any time someone tries to break in, which of course is 10:37, and she's got these FBI agents, and she thinks she has the perfect plan. And I always love when they use film almost as trickery for the audience, because we get Emily sort of breaking in and we don't know where she's going. we assume that she's going to the server. And no, it's not. It's actually, as mentioned earlier, it's Luis. But it's all a nice big setup, because while going back to Margot and Jack, where Jack says he wanted to kind of do this himself, he plays his part, and she knows that, family and Carl, he can make a connection with her there. And yes, he's playing her. Is he aware of it? This is the part that I'm not quite sure on. Is he aware that he's playing her, or is he actually trying to be sincere? Because Margot certainly doesn't think that he's being sincere at all. But it doesn't matter, at least in the short term of it, because she takes the bracelet that Carl makes, which of course is bugged and everything else, and screwed up the computer. So, it's one of those interesting things where we'll talk about Jack in a moment, about kind of everything that happens to him. But in terms of Margot, where she was willing to spare Jack, now I certainly don't think so, because regardless of whether or not Jack knew that he was in on it or not, Margot, if she right from the moment was thinking that Jack's in on this, now she has no thoughts behind it, in the sense of, if I take Jack down with me, so be it. He sided with the wrong people. And and whereas Jack now is siding with Emily 100%, to especially with his commitment speech, I think he understands what that means and everything that comes with it. But more on that in just a tiny little bit. Going back to Margot and Emily, I really liked their interaction. Right now, Margot thought she at least had good leads, and I'm sure she's gonna only double back in on everything else. But as Emily says, I'll do you a favor. I have no weaknesses, and I as convincing as she says it, I definitely get the feeling that Margot doesn't buy that that's the case. One of the easiest things, she's trying to rekindle with her father, so David Clark. You, of course, have Nolan. You, of course, have Jack. You have all these things that are important to her, and, here you have Ben on the fringe, which was one of the things that her private investigator was kind of mentioning, or at least she had wanted him to investigate, and he said, there's nothing there. I brought you great proof and whatever else. So we'll see kind of how it all molds and fits together in that respect. I think Margot, she's not going to give up, and she's gonna find some devious ways to kind of work. She's got to find an alliance that works for her, because right now it's just her and her private investigator. She might go back to Victoria and say, hey, I am actually doing this. Who knows? Because right now, as mentioned, Victoria is not of the assumption that Margot is doing this. So we'll kind of we'll see. But I do enjoy Margot in this sort of quest for revenge, and I think it's gonna play out in some sort of interesting ways. Now, in terms of Jack and Ben and Emily, of course, what I love is scenes that serve two purposes, and the particular scene that I'm talking about is the one where Emily's training, and the reason that she's training, of course, is because she pulls off that amazing move when she's going into Le Marchand Media from the top of the roof. And yet, there's that great scene with her and Ben as they're talking about everything else. They're talking about, I think Jack knows about us, not that there's necessarily an us and whatever else. And, it's one of those things, I don't know, I think that she could actually like Ben. I think that, as Jack says, his timing's always been bad. And it's just one of those things where let's say a day ago, she might have been, she could have gone for it, but because of what happened in the morning and the night before, she's sort of been smitten. And Emily's not one to be smitten, But it's certainly kind of happening, even though Emily dismisses it in the moment, and to Ben, and he kind of continues on, and as he says, one of the interesting lines was Ben says, let's not talk about the past. And one of the reasons that could be is that, Jack is part of her past. And obviously he's referring to all the greater things as well. But, Jack is one of them, and he keeps resurfacing. And so when Jack has that great scene with David Clark about moving on in the future, and he finds, the peace on the beach until you keep searching until you find the perfect one or the perfect match. And he tries to bring it to her, which, of course, gets broken up because, as always, she's got different news. And I think the nice part is that he's coming to accept this. And so if he's going to be involved in this world, might as well be 100% honest, which is why he says to her, I don't know what the future is, but I know just only one thing is that I want to be with you. She says, I'm sorry, I just can't. And he has an interesting line, which I don't know how to quite interpret, but he says, well, I'm not going to wait around. And for me, I'm literally discussing this episode 5 minutes after having watched it. And so how to dissect that, I don't really know. Is a very powerful scene. Followed by, you have the previews for next week, but they don't touch upon any of this. So it's very interesting to see how this cliffhanger is going to be resolved, touched upon, how it's going to move forward, progress, whatever you want to call it. But I think they certainly set us up in the right direction. And unfortunately, what I think is going to happen is that this is going to be the final season. They're going to wrap things up, and as many people have said, Jack is endgame, quote unquote. And so they're starting that train towards that by laying the seeds. So speaking of seeds that they've laid down, let's talk about the future in our predictions segment.
And now, your AFTERBUZZ TV predictions.
All right, next week we get the marker is back, right? So, we're off to plot revenge against various people. We get a 1, 2, 3 count. We don't know, we don't know why we're back at this. We get a person who we've never seen before, and he says, I forget what the exact line is, but it's like, who are you? And you don't want to mess with me, Emily says. So I think all of these things that have been building up, I think people are going to start taking revenge upon each other, and in the sense of Margot is going to be continuing to take on revenge against Emily. You're going to have Lyman and Victoria taking on revenge against Natalie. And so that's, to an extent, as I mentioned, going to affect heavily David Clark, which if it affects David Clark, that affects, of course, Emily. And you know what? We'll see kind of how Jack and the things take it. So, I'm not quite sure why the marker's out, but we'll see. So next week we will be back. I hope to have the full panel, but if not, certainly at least 1 or 2 of them will be back, the lovely ladies, so that way you don't have to listen to me on and on for minutes on end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the discussion, even though it's sort of more beat by beat. I hope, just by the syntax of the way I spoke about the various elements, you got an indication of what my opinions were about everything. I always enjoy the show. That's why it helps when you have multiple people where you can actually discuss certain opinions and whatever else. But it is difficult for one person, so hey, hopefully I did you well. Comment below. I'd love to know your guys' thoughts. It's been a while since Revenge has been on, and so a lot to discuss. I thought an overall really good episode in terms of moving things forward, but also setting things up. And so that's about it. If you haven't already done so, do so by subscribing to youtube.com/AfterBuzzTV if you want to watch the video. If you like listening, iTunes, just type in Revenge AfterBuzz TV. Or we're now on SoundCloud, so soundcloud.com/AfterBuzzTV. We're there. There's a few kinks in that SoundCloud is working out. We're part of their beta testing, so let us know, how that's working out for you. And, of course, a plethora of other ways to listen to us, whether through the iPhone or Android app and anything else. You know, whatever way you fancy listening to us or watching us, hopefully it's there. We've tried to put it out there for the various ways. Follow Roxy Stryer at Roxy Stryer, at Koppel for Mayor, and at Tina Cap, and of course AfterBuzz TV on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We'll see you here next week for another Revenge After Show.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.